What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Star Wars Explained. Today we have another author interview. I'm so excited to have back on the show Delilah Dawson, the author of The Perfect Weapon, Phasma, Black Spire, and her upcoming Star Wars novel Inquisitor, Rise of the Red Blade. It comes out on July 18th. Thank you so much for joining us again, Delilah.
Hey, great to be here again. This is different from our time on the Dragon Con floor.
Yeah, I always think about that. You were my very first Star Wars interview, I think.
Oh my
And
gosh, really?
yeah, it was a Dragon Con, and just sat on the floor outside of one of the panel rooms, and
We made it work.
yeah, it was super fun. How far we've come now.
Right? I didn't know that was your first one. That's awesome. You've come so
Yeah.
far, dude.
Well, so have you. And I have already read Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade. I don't know what I'm allowed to say about it or not, except that I did like it. But
You
we
can
are
always
going
say
to
that.
yeah, we are going to keep this talk spoiler free because we are still about a week or so out from the book's release when this interview comes out. But I want to talk about kind of the themes, the characters, the creation of this novel. So when you were starting to prepare for this book, I'm curious if there was a debate over which Inquisitor this book would be about, or did you know who you wanted to write from day one?
Well, I'm not sure how things work in the High Republic, but for those of us who are kind of still working in the general timeline, um, the editors usually come to us with the idea. So it's not that I was getting to choose; it's that they came and said, "We have this particular Inquisitor that we would like you to, write the book for and come up with a backstory for." So she was part of the original. Would you like to do this idea that was floated to me? Which, of course, the answer is always yes. But there was, the question of who else could be included in the book because, especially right now, with so many different people working in this timeline in this universe, I do not have free reign to do whatever I want with any Inquisitor that I want. Some of them, those, you know, those Lego figures are in someone else's backdrop. So there was some discussion over who I could or couldn't use. And yeah, so if you are reading it and you're going, why didn't she do this? Why didn't she do that? I tried. They wouldn't let me. It's always the answer.
Well, it's funny. I kind of wondered if this was something that was assigned to you or you chose because it seemed like a character you would have chosen. You've said in previous interviews that you like to write violent women. And so
For that.
uh, I saw this when the announcement was made. I was like, this is perfect.
Yeah, no, I think that the Star Wars editors are really, really good at matching, what they and Lucasfilm were trying to accomplish with the book, with an author who will do a really great job with it. Nobody comes to me and is like, "We want you to write a really tightly plotted book about, uh, dog fights and diplomacy." Like that's not what you come to me for. You go to Alexander Freed or Claudia Gray. So violent women, they come to me for. Tightly plotted battles in space, they do not.
Well, yeah, this is definitely a character study, I would say, that was really enjoyable. Until now, Iscat, this Inquisitor, she's only appeared in 2 comic issues before now. So, what struck you? What struck you about her in your first impression when you were reading those issues?
I mean, first of all, that she looks very cool and intimidating. We don't see a lot of red-skinned characters outside of males of Brax, I guess. So that was very fun. Was getting to craft a new species and give her slight differences from species that we know, and also when you read the Charles Soule novel, when you read Charles Soule's comic, it's only like 1.5 issues. It's not, she doesn't appear for very long. You don't know where she comes from, what her name is, what she's doing there. You only see one very small part of her life. And there's moments where there's one particular moment where you think, oh, this is a good person. And you go, oh God, it's really not. So it was fun to try to figure out how to look at that character and where they were and figure out what had brought them to this point where this is how they would react to a very specific situation. I mean, it's very similar to Phasma in that, we take a character at the very end of, at a very mature part of their life, is what we see, that small snapshot, and then to figure out what happened in the whole rest of their life that made them that person in that moment.
I think it's interesting you bring up that moment in the comic where she is an Inquisitor and she does look like she is doing something that might be good and then turns it around. In your mind, was that a genuine moment of conflict within her, or was it always she's going to do the more cool thing?
I mean, Charles Soule decided what she was going to do. I didn't get any say in that, but it was definitely it was a hard moment to square with. In order for you to go on this journey with this character, you have to begin by, liking her, at least having empathy for her. And for a lot of people, that moment in Charles Soule's comics, um, especially if you're a mother, it's very hard to find a connection with her as a character. And so I had to figure out why she would feel that way.
Hmm. That in my mind, reading the comic, I was always, I guess I did think that for a second she was doing the kind thing, but then she was caught and
Yeah,
had to fake it.
it's also possible.
Yeah.
No, no.
What was the process like developing a character off of just an issue and a half, and then getting to really flesh out who she was before all of that and during?
Yeah, so, we've seen a lot of uh, Jedi who have turned to the dark side or become Inquisitors. We've seen somebody like Barriss Offee who has, struggled with how she feels about the Jedi. Pong Krell, so there's Jedi from, the prequel era that we've watched wrestle with what the Jedi is becoming and whether or not they believe that the Jedi are doing everything they can in the Clone Wars or whether they're just making things worse. So with Iskat, we wanted to start her pretty young and see who she was and what her own particular struggles with the Jedi would be that would begin to lead her down a different path because there we take something like Anakin, who is probably the closest Jedi we've seen throughout this whole lifespan of why he would make his choices. And it's kind of commonly accepted that he was being manipulated through the Force, by Darth Sidious, and that his feelings around Padme and his fears and his mother, that all of these things are being preyed on. We wanted a character who didn't have that outside influence, who came to the conclusions that she came to on her own from her own experiences. And so that was where I started was, who is she as a person? What are the first kind of tendrils that make her begin to doubt the Jedi? What are, the knife in the ribs that really turns her? So it was a really fun challenge to, you know, through her point of view, show that the Jedi are, uh, not the good guys that we think they are, while from the standpoint of the Jedi overall, they're not doing bad things, they're not being bad people, but a person could see them that way. It was almost like, when a teenager is like, my parents are the worst, I hate my parents, my life is terrible. And then an outside person is like, are they? Is it like, it probably is okay. Like, you kind of need some boundaries. And they're just like, no, my parents are the worst. And it's like, so the Jedi aren't terrible, but in her eyes, for some reasons, in some moments, they have to be.
Oh, that's a perfect lead in into my next question because all in all, I think the Jedi Order has done a pretty good job at keeping its ranks from falling to the dark side, counting all of the Sith Lords, the Inquisitors, and you brought up Barriss and Pongkrell, people like that. We're still talking less than 0.2% of Jedi falling to the dark side. But still, I think it's clear that there is room for them to improve as an organization. So what advice might Iskat have given to the Jedi Council in her exit interview?
Oh man, I mean, her main advice would have been, a knife to the throat. I think at that point, I think her biggest complaint and the thing that really gets to her soul and begins to unravel the tapestry of her goodness is that the Jedi before the Clone Wars, they were kind of raised to be diplomats and to be gardeners and to be consulars and just you're just a good person going out in the world doing good. You're just a someone who doesn't face a whole bunch of challenges, but is just being a good person out in the world doing good. And then once the Clone Wars starts, suddenly they take all of these Jedi that have been raised for this, kind of ascetic monk life, and are suddenly like, oh, by the way, now you're a general in a war, you're fighting, you're killing, you have to decide, in a moment's notice who to kill and who not to kill, and then you have to deal with grief and you have to deal with death, and these are not really things that the Jedi prepared their Padawans for before going into the Clone Wars, and hurriedly knighting them and making them generals and sending them out. And so I think that's a big struggle she has, is they've taught me so much, but they didn't teach me how to grieve. And now that I need to grieve, they're telling me not to. They're saying, well, we rejoice for he's one with the force. And like, it reminds me of like I go mountain biking and people shout, send it. And I'm like, what does send it mean? No one can tell me what that means, but you're always shouting it at me. And that's what the rejoice is, because like she doesn't want to rejoice that the people that she loves are dead. And she doesn't see how that is, the only real sticking point she's offered for how to deal with all the pain that's suddenly in this life that she had anticipated that she would just have this very gentle life out being a traitor.
Oh yeah, I don't know why I didn't expect the Clone Wars to be so central to this story. Like it makes the most sense, but I remember getting into that and being like, "Oh, this is really, really going to dig into the Clone Wars." From the way I kind of saw it, is we're seeing the Clone Wars through the eyes of someone that doesn't have plot armor, like Anakin and Obi-Wan, and a lot of the Clone Wars series. It's like we're following Jedi Masters who we know make it to Revenge of the Sith, but watching how devastating it could be through a scat's eyes was a new perspective that I really, really liked. So I also wanted to just talk about your experience writing in that era, because up until now you've been largely in kind of the sequel trilogy era. So what's the experience been to jump backwards so many years? What's it like, a good 60 years on the timeline, and explore something new?
Well, I'd say the most challenging part is just the keeping up with the timeline. Gosh, if Kristen Baver's timeline books had been out for this, like I was just like, please send me this book right now. Like send me the PDF. Because the Clone Wars, there's so much that happens in this short amount of time. And it's, down to like days. You get into the sequel era and there's more time. But the Clone Wars, it's like we know what happened on this day and this day and this day and this day. So you can't just go make up some more because they're on that day, Mace Windu in some book has sat down and said these three things are happening. And if there had been a war that day, like a battle, he'd have said it. So you can't just make up battles. So we really had to, lean hard into, the timeline. When is this? What else is going on in the galaxy? What are other people doing? Who's available? Who isn't? I think I had several. I have some Jedi Masters in there that are, this guy comes in and out of her missions, and I had certain Jedi Masters, and they're like, oh no, she's dead now. She's straight up dead. You gotta pick somebody else. So I think that's how Ki-Adi-Mundi came in, because we're like, oh, okay, well, who's alive and in the temple? So there were definite challenges to juggling where people could be, and in the sequel era, I say, well, which planets could this happen on? They're like, oh, just make up a planet. And this, they're like, oh no, it has to be here and here and here. So there was less freedom in that general way, but it also meant that there was information to dig into. I can go into Wikipedia, which God bless you, Wikipedia, we could not do without you, and see what was happening on this planet, that planet, where the battles were. So it was almost like the difference between uncharted territory and we have detailed maps.
Right. That makes sense. Do you find that to be more of an advantage or more of a challenge? Because I like that. Yeah, there is stuff to dig into mine, instead of having to make it all up yourself. But is it a fun trade-off? A little more restriction, but maybe a little more aid?
I mean, part of the fun there is that, when you're making stuff up, you're making stuff up. And when you're going into established canon, you can find little people. I feel like the fans enjoy the tidbits and the Easter eggs, and they're like, oh, I've heard of that planet. Oh, that's where, I'm not going to say because we're not doing spoilers, but like, there's a couple planets where you're like, oh, they were there? Like, oh, I've heard of that. So you have these little pings in your head that, give you that little fan experience of like, oh, I know this, versus when I just make up, Vashka or something, you're like, I don't know what that is. Why do I care about that?
Yeah, and that's always kind of the balance of dropping little breadcrumbs that are fun to point out, but not, dropping them constantly, so Star Wars never grows.
Yeah.
But I do have to backpedal and correct myself a little bit, because this is not your first venture into the Clone Wars. You did write a Star Wars Adventures comic called Raiders of the Lost Gundark, which was
How
like
could we forget?
a Jar Jar Binks and like Padme Indiana Jones style adventure, which is like perfect timing, because when this comes out, Indy 5 will have just released. So I just wanted to ask, what's your relationship like with Indy? Because that's another one of my favorite franchises.
Oh man. So I grew up in the 80s when if you didn't see a movie in the theater, you just like didn't see it until VHS existed in the 90s. But my parents were weird introverts, and we didn't go out a lot. But I have a very like one of my huge memory moments was we went to this wedding, and I was dressed up and I was uncomfortable and it was hot and I was so unhappy. And my parents were like, "Okay, like we're gonna sneak out before the reception and go see a movie." And like we didn't see a lot of movies, so I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's do this." So we sneak out. I'm in this horrible dress. You know, you get to the theater late. We're in like the front row. I don't know what's going on because I'm, pretty young. And then we saw Temple of Doom, like front row,
Hearts right in your face.
right in your face. And I'm just like, so I'd seen Raiders, but man, that stuck in your head a bit. So yeah, I love Indy because I grew up in it. Um, I love the ride at Disney. I watched the show with River Phoenix. Like I was there for it. So yeah, I can't. And I even saw the Crystal Skull in the theater. So very much looking forward to. Although I saw in a preview where it's like he's riding a horse through a subway in front of a subway train, and I'm just like, you can't ride a horse. Like there's grit in the ground in that horse. Even if it would behave, it's gonna like fall on your 80. You're gonna break a hip. Like you can't do this, Indy.
Be careful with Harrison.
Yeah, you're fragile. And like horses can't do that. That's my thing. Everybody has that thing in movies that gets to them. Like the people that watch like the gun slide rack and the bullet flies, they're like, that's not how it works. Minus horses, and horses don't do that. That horse would just rear up and throw him and be gone.
Well, how did your parents react to Temple of Doom? Were they two of the parents that got PG-13 created?
No, my parents were they were just used to me. I mean, my dad used to show me Jaws as just to frighten me. Like he would call me in to bring him. He'd be like, "Hey, can you bring me a glass of milk or whatever?" And I'd run into the room and it was like right as Jaws was attacking someone and be like, "No, you have to stay here and watch it." Or, he'd show me Piranha, and then the next time we were at the lake, he would throw bread at me when I was swimming in the lake and all the brim would come around me and he'd be like, "Oh, it's the piranhas, you're gonna die." So like they were fine.
That's hilarious and awesome.
Were built different.
Yeah.
And my dad was a jerk.
Well, I think that's all the non-spoilery questions I have. So we're going to wrap up this interview. We are going to do another one that will come out after the book is released a couple days so we can talk spoilers. But for now, where can people find you online? Is there any work you'd like to plug, including Inquisitor and beyond? And where can people follow you?
Sure. So on any of the social media, I will be Delilah S. Dawson. So right now I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and kind of flitting out of Blue Sky, seeing what's going on there. I have a Facebook author page, but I don't go there very often because the UI is terrible. And then my website is delilahsdawson.com. So you can usually see what's going on there. And I have this thing where like on Twitter, like if you talk to me, I will talk back to you. If you have a question that I can answer in good faith, like if you ask me mean questions, I won't answer those. But if I can help you, I try to help new writers figure out publishing. But if you have like an ungoogleable question, you ask me on Twitter. Like that's the best place to interact with me. Like if you want to chat. And then coming up, I've got 4 books out this year. So I've got, first of all, I don't even think I've got a bunch of them up here behind me. I don't have an arc for it yet, but I have a Disney Mirrorverse novel that's out in early July. It's called Mirrorverse Pure of Heart. It's based on the Disney Mirrorverse mobile game. So it's got like Snow White with a giant axe, and everybody's got huge weapons. And then you get to see what would happen if like Snow White, Hades, Sully, Rapunzel, Tiana, and Stitch were hanging out together. Then I've got Rise of the Red Blade on the 18th. There are currently 4 editions available if you're like a collector. There's the regular one. There's a Barnes & Noble exclusive one that's got a poster inside of it. There is the San Diego Comic-Con limited edition exclusive that's got a special cover.
That cover is sick.
Yes, it's this one here with the mirror, and then it comes with a really, really nice Inquisitor pen. And then Inkstone Books has this really gorgeous one with red edges. Like I've always wanted, with the pages are bright red. That will be out through Inkstone, so that can be pre-ordered right now. Then I have Midnight at the Houdini, which is this one with the key up here. That is a sweet YA romance. It's out in September. And then in October, I have a terrifying horror novella called Bloom that came from when my teenage daughter said, "Why are all the cool serial killers dudes?" And I was like, they don't have to be. So it's a wide range of stuff for you coming out this year.
That's wild. You have been incredibly busy. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Well, that's going to be it for this video. We will see you again in a couple weeks wearing exactly the same outfit. Uh, but thank you for speaking with us today, Delilah. And thank you all for watching. And may the force be with you.
Thank you so much, guys. Hope you dig it.